Good evening. Good evening. My name is Robert Lester, and I am a proud member of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated, and also an employee at the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy. I want to welcome you this evening to our town hall, Understanding the Redistricting. This evening, we're going to be assisted with a moderator to speak to a distinguished panel. And our moderator for this evening is Mr. Kim Greenidge. Kim Greenidge is the Regional Vice President and General Manager at 12 On Your Side TV in Richmond, Virginia. Please welcome Kim Greenidge.
Thank you so much, Robert. I really appreciate that. And thank you to the Divine Nine, Virginia Divine Nine fraternities for inviting me once again. So let's just set the table a little bit for what we're looking to do tonight. Tonight is going to be about education, information, and will allow me to ask some of the questions that you may be wondering about. Also, we'll do that until about 7:40. And then what we will allow time for some of your questions that you can submit in the chat. Just remember, when we get there, there'll be a lot of duplicate questions. So if I don't get to your individual question, it's not personal. It means that probably that question has already been answered or somebody else has already asked it. But I think it would be important for us to set the table. So that you know, I am a neutral party in this. That means that if you are a Democrat, a Republican, or an independent, please have your ears open tonight for information to learn and ask all of the hard questions that you want to ask. April 21st will be consequential for this state and this country, and you should be voting as an informed voter. And let's talk about the ballot question. So I'm going to read it to you, so bear with me. Some of you that already have been here earlier may have already read this, but for those that just joined us, let's get some clarity. So the question for the proposed constitutional amendment, the question is, should the Constitution of Virginia be amended to allow the General Assembly to temporarily adopt new congressional districts to restore fairness in the upcoming elections, while ensuring Virginia's standard redistricting process resumes for all future redistricting after the 2030 census? So that is the question. Now, let's go to the explanation for voters. What does a yes vote mean? A yes vote would amend the Constitution of Virginia to permit the General Assembly to implement revised congressional districts for upcoming elections before the 2030 census. The amendment specifies that this authority would be temporary and that the Virginia's standard redistricting process would resume after the 2030 census to produce future district maps. So on the other side, what does a no vote mean? A no vote says that you would leave the Constitution unchanged. Congressional districts' boundaries would remain in place under the current redistricting framework until the next scheduled redistricting process following the 2030 census, unless changed through existing legal or judicial processes. Okay, so now that the table has been set, let's meet some of the panelists that will be helping us to navigate some of the questions that I have that were supplied to me, and then some of the questions that you have. Executive Director, People Demanding Action. Welcome, Andrea Miller.
Very much. I am very glad to be here.
How are you, Andrea? Our second panelist is Michelle Moffitt, Director of Civic Engagement, Virginia Civic Engagement Table. Welcome, Michelle Moffitt.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Our third panelist, the Reverend Dr. Cozy Bailey, President, Virginia State Conference of the NAACP. Welcome, Dr. Bailey.
Thank you, Kim, and good evening, everyone.
And our fourth panelist, Stephen Miller Pitts, Public Policy Director and Fellow. Welcome, Stephen Miller Pitts. Welcome.
Good evening. Good evening.
Okay, so let's get to it. So one of the things I've been wondering, and I know a lot of Americans and Virginians have been wondering, because this is consequential for the country, And I'm going to go to Andrea Miller for this. Tell us, how did we get here? Why are we even having this constitutional amendment as a question on?
Well, the reason we're having the amendment is the President of the United States asked Texas, Missouri, North Carolina, and Ohio to find more Republican districts and to redistrict legislatively in 2025. And so they came up with 9 new Republican seats. That is why we are here.
So you will have some people who will say, well, Texas did that. And a lot of people really objected to Texas doing that. So some people would say, do 2 wrongs, again, this is what some people would say, do 2 wrongs make a right? So is what Virginia is doing, Dr. Bailey, is what Virginia doing the right thing to do at the right time? And why are we doing it?
Yeah, Kim, thank you for that. It doesn't come down to a question of what's right or wrong, Kim. What Texas did was something that we disagreed with, but we have to take action, as Andrea said, in order to re-level the playing field. And so to answer your direct question, what Virginia is doing is absolutely the right thing to do in response to those clear and present threats.
Okay, so tell me, and I'll ask this question of Michelle. What do you think is the support right now around the state? I haven't really seen many polls, but does it look like this is something that is going to pass, or you think this is going to be a close vote, and why?
I think it's going to be close for a couple of reasons. One, it's an April 21st election. A lot of people don't even know it's happening. I've heard stories about somebody seeing a sign in front of a polling place and thinking that was the remnant of the November election. And so voter education is a key piece to this, and just ensuring that people know the election is happening, and that they have all the proper information to make the assessment, to cast their vote as they see fit. And with that, I do expect this to be a pretty close election.
And so following up on that, I know that a lot of people have gotten a lot of mail. I know I've gotten a lot of mail. I've talked to some people and they weren't even really sure what April 21st was all about. We've gotten some mail that said Obama says to vote no. Then we got some other mail that said Obama said to vote yes. And then we also got some mail that was invoking going back to Jim Crow laws. So for people who have received this, Stephen Miller Pitts, can you tell us, where is all this coming from? Is this true? And how should people be responding to this?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, to properly answer your question, we definitely have to view this from a macro level and really have a history by our side when we view what's going on. And so, as a public policy scholar and practitioner, understanding, we're approaching 250-year anniversary of us being a country, right? And how we are put together. And so, when you see in an election, when there's misinformation and disinformation, even understanding the two, disinformation is the blatant lies, right? Like they know that this is inaccurate, right? And then misinformation is, misspoken or, confusion. So we know that there's demographics of voters who will sit out elections because of confusion. So this is a tactic for voter suppression, if you will, because this election, even though it's coming up quickly, it will be decided by a certain demographic of voters, I believe, that this information campaign, when you see in certain communities, specifically being targeted in Black communities, with Obama, you'll see him on the television ad saying "vote yes," and then I even received a mailer that said "vote no" with his picture on it, right? And then that's just clearly disinformation, but it's a tactic for voter suppression, because most people will see that and be confused, and then they don't want to waste the time to go vote and to exercise their vote, so that certain individuals can kind of hijack the direction of allowing the people of Virginia to decide how we put the guardrails in place because of what's happening during the administration and certain things that are transpiring around the country and the world.
So, okay, I'll play devil's advocate just a little bit. So, Andrea, some people would say, well, I remember in 2020, both Obama and Spanberger said gerrymandering is a bad thing. And so they're now saying yes to it. Is this something for convenience? And do you feel that if you said no once, you should not be changing your mind? Give us some context about that.
Here's some context. In 2020, the gerrymander would have been to prevent the creation of a new majority-minority district in a state where, based on their new census, the line should have been drawn to create that district. And there were people that were calling it gerrymandering. There were people who were objecting to it. So what we are looking at now is, as Reverend Bailey said, this is a response. There are 5 states that have said, we are going to pre-cheat in 2026. We're going to move our lines so that we get 9 more seats. I'm from Chicago. So in Chicago, we would say, you don't bring a snowball to a knife fight. The rules of the game just switched. So are you going to play by the rules that the other side is playing by now? Or do you pretend that we are living in a time in the past?
So, Michelle, a question for you. If I was someone who's a Republican and I'm saying, I think this is totally wrong. And if I'm a Democrat, I'm saying, well, I guess this is the right thing to do. What's the long-term effect of this, and how does this affect what happens in the national election in November, to give it context?
Yeah, I think the long-term effect of this, part of the answer to that is that the long-term effect is unknown. We can assume that mid-decade redistricting might become the norm in response to whatever party is in the White House, which can feel overwhelming for sure. And so that's why, going into the short term, we want to equip ourselves with all the information at our disposal. And Virginia is in a unique position to have incredible resources, nonpartisan resources like BPAP, Virginia Public Access Project, to help inform the path that we go down next.
And so, Reverend Bailey, I think that because of all of the information that people have received in the mail and what's on television, what do you still think are some of the misconceptions that people probably still have about how they should answer this question?
So, Kim, what is occurring, and going back to Stephen's question about the mis and disinformation. First of all, I agree with him 100% that this leans towards the disinformation. Disinformation is, in fact, out and out lies. The misconceptions that people still are having is they look at television and they see current advertisements from President Obama and from our current Governor Spanberger. And then they look at the disinformation that's being put into their mailboxes, where the people who are putting these things are cleverly taking out of context statements that have been made in the past, as Andrea Miller just described, about a different situation. Those comments that are on those cards are not pertinent to the current situation that we have. I would agree to her to a degree about the snowball to a knife fight. I'm from a little bit south of there, Andrea, in St. Louis, and we feel the same way. We won't bring snowballs to a knife fight. But my point is that we have to understand what is going on here. And Ken, it goes all the way back to your opening question about right and wrong. This is not about right and wrong, and people need to understand what it is about is that Virginia has the opportunity to be a formidable player, and what our country looks like over the next 4 years. What people seem to not have an understanding about, even though it has been explicitly stated, as Michelle just said, this is a temporary situation. It will go until the normal cycle of decade-long census in 2030, and then we will go back to our normal system. What people need to really understand is that the question, although stated in a complicated way, it is very simple. Will Virginia push back against the attempts for a dictator to be successful in this country? If you do not want that to happen, vote yes for this.
So let me ask you, Stephen Millipitch, let's say we wake up on the 22nd of April and the vote is no. What are the consequences of the vote being no? And what are the consequences of the vote being yes? But answer about what is the game plan for Democrats if the vote is no?
Yeah, absolutely. So you definitely asked me very much so loaded questions, right? And so in the effect that on the 22nd, the people have spoken, the answer is no, then for Democrats, the playing field, the methodology has to change, right? And then the midterm elections still have to be won just under the current lines, right? And so that definitely is what the Democratic plan would be. If it's no, I would say that is an additional. I have this sliding scale that I keep. I think that I might be more on the grave side. We're about 60% um, uh, to losing our democracy. Um, the most credible world democratic agency that rates democracies across the world, the most credible one, has downgraded us. We used to have uh, uh, used to be a liberal democracy, which is the free and fair elections plus all the strong checks and balances that we're accustomed to. Something that happened in the 80s and the 90s. And so we were downgraded to an electoral democracy, something that hasn't happened since around 1978 for us, right? And so that basically means that our guardrails are being deteriorated. And so then everything else that you see that's happening from a global scale with the potential and rumors of wars and the different things that we have going on, we are in a recipe of us being divided as a nation, allowing for us to go to a dictatorship, right? And so that's why a yes vote will enable Virginia to put additional guardrails in place to begin to even the playing field for the upcoming midterm elections, to then begin to reestablish those checks and balances that we haven't seen in the last to 18 months to 24 months with everything. And so these things are playbooks that have been put together over the last 40, 50 years. Project 2025 to bring it back up, that's something that we are actually living through. It's an actual living document. And so this question is kind of rooted in that with how it's set up to consolidate power under one branch of government. And so the yes and no vote for me, it has implications that are much larger than if in August will we have new lines that we're voting for or old lines, right? It's very much larger issues at play because our democracy is literally on the line.
So would you all, I'll open this up to everybody, would you all be okay if the same thing was being brought up for Republicans, switching all the rules? Because when the playbook is done one time, we're seeing, at least in Congress, that it gets played over and over. Are you all comfortable if one day, and I'm assuming it seems like, not that you're all partisan, but it feels a little partisan, are you all very comfortable with, let's say, conservatives or Republicans using the same playbook in the future if necessary?
Kim, if I may, I'll jump right in there. It's not a
Thank you.
question about would I be comfortable in the future, because what I'm doing is responding to what they've done in the past and what they're doing right now.
Mm-hmm. And describe a little bit more of that.
I would go back to the analogy that Andrea used, and maybe use some different ones. The way that things are being done has changed. The divisiveness between the parties, and again, this is a nonpartisan issue, and I say that because everybody gets to vote on it. It's not something that was done in other places other than California, where a supermajority of one party in their state legislature dictated to the people what would happen. Here in Virginia, what we're doing is putting something out there and allowing the people to vote on it. I'm always comfortable with something like that, and I believe that people will make a decision that is helpful to Virginia as they think again more nationwide about what this is all about. So it's full circle. Again, yeah, the Republicans are already doing that, but they're doing it in a way that is much more divisive and much more partisan than what we are proposing here in Virginia.
Yeah, I don't know. And I think to add to this, just from a nonpartisan lens, from a public policy, a civic engagement, and historical context of, like, this is not the first vote no campaign, right? This is not this will be the first one for this question, but vote no campaigns are rooted in our legacy and history of America. And so the 15th Amendment, which had poll taxes and literacy tests, right? That was a vote no campaign, right? And so if something didn't happen, that what led to that was in Mississippi, the black voters went from 150,000 to about 9,000, right? um, Masses resistance, when you look at the Southern Manifesto, right, with states' rights and how there was legal rhetoric used, the laws used to defend segregation, right? That was a vote no campaign, a vote no to integration, right? Like these are the things that are historically at our footstool to show that in our country, on both sides, what a vote yes and a vote no campaign has done, and when it's brought to the voters. And so even when we go to the anti-suffrage movement, right, the 19th Amendment, right, to argue about women's, that was a vote no campaign, right? So we're back in this, right? History repeats. The question is different this time around, and so it's for us all to take a stand, or at the end we will all reel with the consequences of what our vote or lack of vote leads to.
So where do things kind of stand right now? I would think that this is a very big issue, and maybe Andrea, you can give us some context about with it seems that there's a lot of pressure on voting early and voting before April 21st. Why is that important? And can you help us with if there are latest numbers out about how people are voting in various districts? Is this something that seems to be important to the Virginia voters?
Well, number one, the Virginians are coming out and voting. I looked at the early voting numbers. Roughly 565,000 people have already early voted. At this point in 2025, 516,000 people had early voted. So right now, we are outpacing the 2025 election, which, while it was a gubernatorial election in Virginia, we ended up coming within 75% turnout of a presidential election. So the whole idea behind early voting is life happens. And so if you've only got one day to vote, what if on that one day life happens to you and you don't get to vote? So in Virginia, we have a glorious 45 days. We've got 2 Saturdays. Next election cycle, we'll have 2 Saturdays and 2 Sundays. It gives voters the opportunity to get out and vote. We've got hourly wage workers in Virginia. They may not be able to get time off. With our Saturday voting, people can get out and vote. Now, here's something people haven't talked about. What are they doing up in Congress? Congress is responsible for the federal budget. And right now, if we look at what they're doing in Washington, D.C., they're trying to make sure that women, people of color, rural voters, and older people may not be able to register and vote again because they don't have proof of citizenship. That really is what this election is about. It is about, do we like what is going on in Washington, and do we want it to continue? Or are we going to meet the challenge when the party in charge says, we're going to cheat because we know people don't like what we're doing, so we're going to make sure we can keep doing it? And then Virginia and California stand up and go, whoa, wait a minute, not so fast. We see what the fight is and we can engage. Think of it this way. You've got a child, the child falls down. You've got a child, an adult knocks them down. Is your reaction the same? No.
So, Michelle, I'm going to put you a little bit on the hot seat, and not knowing what your politics are, but I'm going to try to ask you to imagine yourself as being an independent or Republican or conservative who is totally against saying yes, and they want to say no. I want you to hear from, I know you hear from some of your constituents and people that you know, and they tell you the reasons why they feel it should be no. Can you articulate the other side and why people feel that this should be a no without question? What are they saying?
I think that goes back to some historical messaging we've had around gerrymandering, right? And it's always bad. It's exclusively bad. We can never say yes to it. And if that's, the people on this call, we have a lot more political education than the average voter might, right? And so we can look at those arguments and take history into account, and also take into account this proposal with everything else we see going on in the country. And so for the average voter, it's really just going to be as simple as, I was told this was bad. That's why I have to be a no. And with that, I have to say I'm part of a nonpartisan nonprofit organization. This is all hypothetical, but I think it just comes down to basics and how we are all very, very tuned into politics, and most people are not.
Do any of you understand why somebody would be a hard no? Is there anybody who does understand that on this call?
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
I think a lot of the hard no is rooted in like the historical context of America being too big to fail, and allowing the Constitution to be the living document and to dictate, right? And so within that, every 10 years we have opportunity for the census, and the census can dictate the redrawing of lines. So a lot of individuals believe in the institution, and they say, hey, it's 2026, in 4 years the lines will be redrawn potentially anyway, right? All of this can be relooked at, especially with independent commissions. And so I do understand from solely from that standpoint how that is a credible argument and is rooted in fact, actually, right? And so you do have to Michelle's point, kind of look at the other nuances and the geopolitical posturing and kind of the climate of the country to understand like we might not get to 2030 under the government that'll allow us to even do that if we don't put some guardrails in place, right? And so you definitely have to assess the current on the ground. But I do understand the no factor in that. And then also there's individuals that potentially will go vote yes, but holistically are a no because of, to your earlier point, what stops the other side from, or whoever's in power from when they get in power doing whatever they want to do, right? And so from that standpoint, I understand that too, because it's like you don't want to poke the bear and start something, right? It's kind of like the nuclear options. Nobody's going to do a nuke because once one body does it, then it's expected everybody will do it, right? That's the guardrails, right? And so you have to assess the guardrails to see even in that if we don't do anything, will we still have the same type of democracy that we claim that we currently have?
So,
Yeah, I would agree. I'm
ahead,
sorry.
go
I
ahead,
would
Michael.
agree with Stephen that he has laid out two groups of people who would potentially vote no, and the reasons why they would. The first one, I think we all need to understand and probably agree that his first group would have people from both sides of the political aisle, if you will, okay, because they are voting ideologically. The second part of those people who are fearful of violating, if you will, the norms of the past. I would add that there's probably a third group that would be a hard no. Those people who recognize that this is, in fact, a nonpartisan initiative. This is, in fact, something that's placed before the people, and they are afraid that the people will upset the power that they have held on to for so long. And so I think that that's an important third category of people who would be hard no's as well.
Yeah, and I think that taking a little personal privilege here, I think that it's important for the context to be that you are going to have some people who are possibly progressive, possibly independents, and liberal who are going to vote no, just mainly because they feel don't want to go there. This is not the right thing to do, and I think you all will have to respect that vote. So I do feel that when we get past our next 6 minutes, because I know that that chat is probably very hot with a lot of questions. And one of the things that I think you're going to hear, and I would like you to address it, is that you all are trying to give information and be nonpartisan. And we know that being nonpartisan can sometimes be hard. But Michelle, tell me, what is the kind of conversation that neighbors should be having when they're having a discussion about this? Because I believe that the civility of being able to talk about two divergent thoughts is something that we're losing in our local community, our state community, and certainly in our national community. How should we be having a civil conversation about this?
Yeah, I think that is presenting the facts. And I want to go back to, I've seen some message or some comments about the flyers in the chat, back to the disinformation piece of it. And we keep in mind, looking at facts, looking at mis and disinformation, the mailers that have gone out, D is for deliberate, right? Like that is deliberately trying to play on, and not play, it's deliberately trying to manipulate voters into voting one way based on Virginia's past with Jim Crow. And so it's thinking critically and also taking into account the messenger that those mailers are coming from. What are their motives? What do they want? And going back to the unique, very great resources we have in Virginia, like in the way of VPAP, we have more information than other voters have that is so easily accessible. And, again, we're here, we're tuned in. We want to know what's going on. Let's take advantage of that and be leaders in our communities and be those trusted messengers and validators and equip ourselves to be able to have those conversations. Because, if I'm like the average voter, right, and I get one of those mailers, I might assume the worst or just like take it at face value. And we're in the position to kind of redirect those conversations that really goes into, holding two things in your own head and being able to be like diplomatic and kind about it.
Okay. Next to last question before we go to some of the viewer questions. This one is for you, Andrea. So we also know, some of us know, that we could have this vote, and then I believe that the court still has some say. Andrea, speak to us about what is still pending and what could possibly happen after April 21st.
The Supreme Court has said they will rule on redistricting on April 23rd. That will be 2 days after the people of Virginia vote their power and their voice. Now, there is technically no complaint with the notion of partisan redistricting. After all, the Supreme Court has said that's really the only kind of redistricting they are willing to allow, and that's the United States Supreme Court. What the Virginia Supreme Court is looking at is the underlying process that was used to arrive at the vote. There is an argument that says when you are amending the Virginia Constitution, you vote on amending the Constitution outside of an election. That is the real process question before the court. Mm-hmm. And so my response and the response of many people is when they wrote the Virginia Constitution, there was no such thing as early voting. Election day was the first Tuesday in November or whenever there was an election. This 45 days of early voting was not even in anyone's mind in 1971 when we reviewed the Virginia Constitution. So it is process, how they arrived there, not is the redistricting fair.
So I have a question for all of you, and I think that our viewers would want to know. So will you all respect the vote by a show of hands, whether it's yes or no?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, we are a minute away from 7:40, and I said at 7:40 we would begin to answer some of the questions, and we also may have some comments from some of the people on. Just so people know, they have a perspective. We had about 550 people who registered for this Zoom, and we have other people that are watching it on other streaming channels such as YouTube, and will watch this later on. So I appreciate this panel coming forward to talk about this important issue. But I also will say to everyone, please take the time to educate yourself on the policies. You may, after even the questions from the viewers, you may still have questions that you have concerns about, but please be educated before you vote. All right, Carlos, who's the man behind the scene, can you show me some of the questions that we have from the audience? Okay, we have a name up. This is from Mario Williams Reynolds. How did the new district maps come about? Who wants to answer that? Dr. Belling, are you?
Yeah, I can. First of all, the bipartisan commission that Stephen spoke about, that work was temporarily suspended, and this work was done, and correct me if I'm wrong, Stephen, was done by members of the legislature in Richmond.
Any more to add to that, Stephen?
Yeah, so
In terms of what was the process, I think is what Mr. Williams Reynolds was asking about. How did the maps actually get drawn? How did it come about?
yeah, and I've seen another comment in the chat, so I'll kind of put these together. So the current congressional maps were redrawn in 2020. There was a bipartisan commission, eight General Assembly members and eight non General Assembly members. They couldn't come to an agreement, and the Supreme Court came in, and then they kind of set the current maps that we do have, right? So that kind of gives you some context, like even the current process as it is isn't really work. It hasn't worked to fit our need. But then these current maps during this current General Assembly cycle, both chambers had maps that were drawn, and then they did some uh, conferring and with the governor, and then they came out with what they suggested as these new maps for this temporary period. And I think that's also something that needs to be said. Like this, it's not forever. This is until we go back to the original process. But I do think that it is valuable to add the original process hasn't currently worked for us yet either. And so we do need to find something that does work when it comes to redistricting.
Okay, next question. This is from Will Cumbia. How were the new district maps created, and are the proposed ones the final ones that will be in place if yes wins? I think we answered part of that, but we can answer it again. What happens if the Supreme Court of Virginia challenges after the vote?
It depends on what the court says, and if the court chooses to say, we're going to invalidate the vote that just happened, which I would not expect this court to do.
Yeah. And I think it's important for us to understand that the Supreme Court doesn't challenge. The Supreme Court may ultimately rule on a challenge.
So you think the Supreme Court is waiting to see how the voters of Virginia vote?
And will potentially say we will not overturn the will of the people of Virginia. Right. However, in the event you ever do something like this again, you must adhere to, and we recommend you adjust the Constitution of Virginia and recognize early voting as voting.
Okay, next question, callers. This is from George Fletcher Bowman III. Will the new congressional districts cause any changes to local municipal lines or just create new seats for candidates to run for federal office?
I can take that one. This proposal is solely for congressional seats. So our current lines for both state Senate and state House of Delegates will remain unchanged until the next traditional redistricting process goes ahead in 2031. So this is only changing these congressional seats for this year, 2026, and then they'll remain for 2028 should this amendment succeed. And then we're back to the drawing board for all of those districts in 2030 and 2031.
Okay, that was a very good question. So this only affects the federal election. This doesn't affect any local districts, local elections. Okay. Richard Maddox, can you address the fact that there is a dismantling of Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act? Who wants to take that one?
I can give a little to somebody. So this is referencing the Calais case that's up in the Supreme Court of the United States right now. That case originates out of Louisiana. And it's about majority minority districts and whether those are pursuant to that Section 5 of the VRA. The Supreme Court had Calais on its list to maybe give a decision about last year. They punted it to this year. So we're waiting for that. And what the effects might be for Virginia are likely not as harsh as they would be in other states. It's really going to hit the Deep South more than it'll hit Virginia. But I just wanted to give a little bit of background and see if maybe somebody else on the panel can speak further to it.
And I think with that contextual statement there, Michelle, that Section 5 dealing with pre-clearance, Virginia was not under the pre-clearance requirement, and so that changes. The other thing is that it is debatable that Virginia actually has, and I hate the term majority minority, congressional districts. That and that plays into there's nothing in this plan that was intended to either increase or decrease actual minority representatives. I mean, of one of the 11, it is not about that at all. Nor, in my opinion, will it change that based upon the maps that are shown. So, I certainly understand the question about pre-clearance, but I think with Michelle's context and the statement that I made, hopefully that answers Mr. Maddox's question.
Yeah, and
I want to make one quick addition. Everything about our ability to vote is currently being challenged at the federal level. So the Voting Rights Act literally states abilities to administer elections. Everything that has people voting is being challenged.
Okay, next question. Okay, another question from Mario Williams Reynolds. How did we get to this referendum, which is out of cycle?
So let's say how we can do this in like a truncated method without a bunch of terminology.
Explain the question for the wider audience. Out of cycle.
So how do we get to now? We have to go vote in April 21st about changing line. So for when we got to go vote in August, right? Okay. How about that? And so there were some other states that decided to do some mid cycle or midterm. If you look at the cycle, it's 10 years. That's when we do redistricting. So in the middle of that, a couple states did what they wanted to do, and so they redrew some stuff, right? And it either went left or right. I'll keep it like that, right? And so Virginia said, okay, well, this is what's happening around the country, and we see what the federal government is not doing, and what they are able to do, and it's not helping the majority of the people. What can we do in Virginia to kind of combat what some of these other states decided to do? That's how we got here. And so Virginia went through some procedural gymnastics, if you will, and we're able to get this on the ballot. And now we got to go vote.
Okay, next question is to get to as many questions as we can. Another question, callers. Letitia Edwards. Hello, everyone. Panel, would a yes vote from Virginia be sufficient, or could Republicans redraw another state's map?
We can tag team this, but I want to jump on the first part of this. The first part of this is that we got to do a few votes for this to matter at all, right? And so the first vote is just the yes vote, right? And so then there's a whole lot of stuff that'll happen in between that. And then if we actually in August vote with what the yes actually led to, then the decisions, not in August, but the decisions in November are going to matter to fully answer that question, because we won't know who the actual representatives will be until November.
Okay.
And there are other states that are looking at redistricting. Florida is looking at redistricting. Georgia may look at redistricting. Alabama had been making noise. I think they've decided they're not going there. But yes, there are other states that could decide they wanted to redraw their lines. In Virginia, again, it is a constitutional amendment. The legislature made a decision, and then they had to go ask the people. The other side, the legislatures have made the decisions, and the people of their state did not get a vote on it.
And I would just, as Stephen suggested, tag team, I would just say this: we must recall answers to some of the previous questions. How did we get here? Globally, we got here because somebody said, I need 5 more seats in Congress. And that person wasn't in Virginia. That person is in Washington, D.C. And so Virginia's actions did not start this, nor made Virginia's actions end this.
And I think another point just to highlight, because the Supreme Court is currently also, I don't know if you call it bureaucracy or judiciocracy. A lawyer, please tell me what the right word would be, what they're doing. But they've delayed their ruling in Louisiana, which deals with Louisiana's congressional maps, to kind of see what is happening across the rest of the country and in Congress, before they do a ruling in Louisiana, which deals with the majority Black districts and if they can have 2, 1, or none.
Okay, I'm going to try to get in a couple of questions. Derek Blair, how does this impact, and just one of you could answer, please, how does this impact the Save America Act being discussed in Congress? Who wants to grab that one?
I can take it. So this amendment doesn't have an effect on the Save America Act that's up right now in the Senate. However, it could very well be the opposite of that act having an effect on voting, period. We've mentioned DPOC, or documentary proof of citizenship, which is what would be required under the SAVE Act. And that is an original birth certificate or passport. And then, for women who are in heterosexual marriages, a lot of them have changed their last names. In fact, 8 in 10 women in Virginia have changed their last name, meaning that their birth certificate as issued originally no longer matches the name on their other documents. And so that is voter suppression, that is voter disenfranchisement. So regardless of what happens with this amendment, definitely want to stay in tune on that and speak out against it.
And that's another reason why this is
a Divine Nine session that we'll have.
And that's another reason why this redistricting coincides with the SAVE Act. And if they can pass that act, currently, it's passed in the House, I believe, right?
Yes.
And so we need legislators that won't do. Basically, it's a poll tax. So for Black communities, Black members, it's a poll tax. It's a literacy tax to that. If you know that the data shows that 2/3 of Black Americans do not have a passport. To get a passport is about $165 today. That probably will go up if the SAVE Act went into place or something like that. And then all the documents that you need to get a passport is another poll tax, because you need to pay for those documents if you can even have the information to get those documents.
If I may say, Kim, in forums that I've done in forums that I've done like this, every time a question about SAVE Act comes up while we're talking about redistricting, and I would hope that people just took advantage of what they think is a competent group of people to ask that question, and not have actually conflating that federal proposed legislation with what we're doing here in Virginia.
That's true. 2 different things. So I'm going to pass it quickly to Lester Roberts, and then I will be back with a closing thought to wrap us up. Lester?
Yes. A couple of slides will be coming up for us shortly. If my partner there can pull those slides for me. All right. I'm going to just keep it moving here. So next steps for the organizations that put the program together tonight. First, we want to encourage all people who hear my voice to vote by April the 21st. Thank you there, Carlos. I appreciate you. We want to encourage all people to vote by April 21st, which is the special election. Currently, in order, if you're not registered to vote, you have until April the 14th. That leaves you a week's time to get your vote in. Early in-person voting started on March the 6th. It ends on April the 18th. And I would encourage you to check your locality or your local register office, because there is weekend voting in different areas around the Commonwealth. The last day for mail-in ballot requests is April the 10th. So these days are coming up very quickly. Next slide. So it was a lot of questions in the chat about the next election. So we have primary elections for the United States Senate, our United States House of Representatives, and there's also local elections in different jurisdictions around the Commonwealth. So yes, we're going to be voting for the ballot initiative on April the 21st. Then we're going to go back and vote again on August the 4th for the primaries for the Senate. Right now we have one candidate. The seat is the one that's currently held by Senator Warner. So he's up for election, and then all of the House, all 11 House districts. All right, next slide. Then comes the main election, which is on November the 3rd. That's our general election, where we will select the candidates between both parties or three parties to represent us in the Senate, the House, the local elections, and also there's going to be 3 constitutional amendments on the ballot on that day. And you can read more about those constitutional amendments, because we don't want to delay time on this right now. We're down to 2 minutes. Let's see. I would close by saying, yes, we have a lot of elections between November of 25 and November of 26. We'll be going to the polls a total of 4 times. Please go out and vote. I also encourage you to get your family members, your friends, the people you go to church with. If you're a student, get your other students that you're in school with. Encourage everyone to participate in voting. This organization, the D9 fraternities, and also some other supporting organizations. I want to recognize Rev Up Virginia. That is the advocacy group that is advocating or supporting or limiting barriers for our people with disabilities. Rev Up Virginia is a great organization that partnered with us on this. Also, Crusade for Voters in Richmond, Virginia, and a number of sororities have supported us on this town hall today. We are proposing to possibly do 3 more town halls. One would deal with the SAVE Act that just came up on the back end. We don't have time to talk about it now. The next one is misinformation, disinformation. And the last one, most importantly, restoration of rights, was one of those 3 amendments. So you will hear more information from us, and please stay tuned, go out and vote. And back to you, Kim Greenwich.
Thank you very much, Lester. So here's my closing comment. First of all, thank you to my panelists who volunteered their time to be here. Nobody was paid to be here. And thank you for those of you that took the time to register and to be here and to give your questions. Here's my one ask of all of you. Talk about what you talked about and heard tonight. Have conversations with people who disagree with how you feel. I know sometimes that can be difficult for both sides, but it is the only way that we can learn from each other. I believe that at this time, discourse is the most important thing that we can do. But the most important thing you can do is, before you vote, be an informed voter. Thank you so much for having me as your host, and I look forward to the next time. Thank you very much.